This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Hoover. The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. The Prologue. When that Aprilus with his showers swoot, the drought of March hath pierced to the root, and bathed every vein in such liquor, of which virtue engendered is the flower. When Zephyrus eke with his swoete breath inspired hath in every holt and heath, the tender crops and the youngest sun hath in the ram his half coursey run. And small fowles make melody, that sleepen all the night with open eye, so pricketh them nature in their courages. Then long a folk to go on pilgrimages, and palmers for to seek strange strands, to fern hollows couth in sundry lands. And specially from every shire's end of England to Canterbury they wend, the holy blissful martyr for to seek, that them hath holpen when that they were sick. Befell that in that season on a day in Southwark at the Tabard as I lay, ready to wenden on my pilgrimage to Canterbury with devout courage, at night was come into that hostelry well 29 in a company of sundry folk, by adventure y fall in fellowship, and pilgrims were they all, that toward Canterbury would ride. The chamber and the stables were wide, and well we were eased at the best. And shortly, when the sun was to rest, so had I spoken with them every one, that I was of their fellowship anon, and made forward early for to rise, to take our way there as I you devise. But natheless, while I have time and space, ere that I farther in this tale pace, methinketh it accordant to reason to tell you all of the condition of each of them, so as it seemed to me, and which they weren, and of what degree, and eke in what array that they were in. And at a knight then will I first begin. A knight there was, and that a worthy man, that from the time that he first began to ridden out, he loved chivalry, truth and honour, freedom and courtesy. Full worthy was he in his lord's war, and thereto had he ridden, no man far as well in Christendom as in heathenness, and ever honoured for his worthiness at Alisander he was, when it was won. Full oftentime he had the board begun above all nations in Prussa. In Letoa had he raised, and in Russa no Christian man so oft of his degree. In Grenade at the siege eke had he be of Algesir, and ridden in Belle Marie. At Lays was he, and at Sadely when they were won. And in the great sea at many a noble army had he be. At mortal battles had he been 15, and foughten for our faith at Tremesine. In lists thrice, and aye slain his foe. This ilke worthy knight had been also some time with the lord of Palati, against another heathen in Turkey, and evermore he had a sovereign price. And though he was worthy, he was wise, and of his port as meek as is a maid. He never yet no villainy ne said in all his life, unto no man or wight. He was a very perfect gentle knight. But for to tell you of his array, his horse was good, but yet he was not gay. Of fustian he weared a jippon, all besmottered with his habergeon, for he was late y come from his voyage, and wente for to do his pilgrimage. With him there was his son, a young squire, a lover and a lusty bachelor, with locks curl as they were laid in press. Of 20 years of age he was, I guess. Of his stature he was of even length, and wonderly deliver, and great of strength. And he had been some time in Cheviche, in Flanders, in Artois, and Picardy, and borne him well, as of so little space, and hoped to standen in his lady's grace. Embroidered was he, as it were made all full of freshe flowers, white and red. Singing he was, or fluting all the day. He was as fresh as is the month of May. Short was his gown, with sleeves long and wide. Well could he sit on horse, and fair a ride. He coulde songs make, and well indite, joust, and eke dance, as well portray and write. So hot he loved, that by night or tale he slept no more than doth the nightingale. Courteous he was, lowly and serviceable, and carved before his father at the table. A yeoman had he, and servants no mo at that time, for him Lestrade so, and he was clad in coat and hood of green. A sheaf of peacock arrows bright and keen under his belt he bare full thriftily. Well could he dress his tackle yeomanly. His arrows drooped not with feathers low, and in his hands he bare a mighty bow. A nuthead had he, with a brown visage. Of woodcraft could he well all the usage. Upon his arms he bare a gay bracer, and by his side a sword and a buckler, and on that other side a gay dagger, harnessed well, and sharp as point of spear. Christopher on his breast of silver sheen, and horn he bare, the baldric was of green. Forester was he, soothly, as I guess. There was also a nun, a prioress, that of her smiling was full simple and coy. Her greatest oath was but by Saint Loy, and she was cleped Madam Eglantine. Full well she sang the service divine, and tuned in her nose full seemly. And French she spake full fair and fetisly after the school of Stratford at Bow, for French of Paris was to her unknow. At Meta was she well y taught withal. She let no morsel from her lippes fall, nor wet her fingers in her sauce deep. Well could she carry a morsel, and well keep that no droppe ne fell upon her breast. And courtesy was set full much her lest. Her overlippe wiped she so clean, that in her cup there was no farthing seen of grease, when she drunken had her draught. Full seemly after her meat she wrought, and sickerly she was of great disport, and full pleasant and amiable of port, and pained her to counterfeit a cheer of court, and be a stately of mannere, and to behold in dignity of reverence. But for to speaken of her conscience, she was so charitable and so piteous, she woulde weep if that she saw a mouse caught in a trap, if it were dead or bled. Of smalle hounds had she, that she fed with roasted flesh and milk and wastel bread. But sore she wept if one of them were dead, or if men smote it with a yarde smart. And all was conscience and tender heart. Full seemly her wimple y pinched was, her nose tretis, her eyen gray as glass, her mouth full small, and thereto soft and red. But sickerly she had a fair forehead. It was almost a spanne brow, I trow, for hardily she was not undergrow. Full fetis was her cloak, as I was ware. Of small coral about her arm she bare a pair of beads, gauded all with green, and thereon hung a brooch of gold full sheen, on which first y written and crowned and after, Amor vincit omnia. Another nun also with her had she, that was her chapelaine, and priestess three. A monk there was, a fair for the mastery, an outrider that loved venery, a manly man, to be an abbot able. Full many a dainty horse had he in stable, and when he rode, men might his bridle hear jingling in a whistling wind as clear and eke as loud as doth the chapel bell, there as his lord was keeper of the cell. The rule of Saint Mare and of Saint Benet, because that was old and some deal straight, this ilke monk let olde things pace, and held after the newe world the trace. He was not of the text a pulled hen that saith that hunters be not holy men. Nay, that a monk, when he is cloisterless, is like to a fish that is waterless. This is to say, a monk out of his cloister, this ilke text held he not worth an oyster. And I say his opinion was good. Why should he study and make himself wood upon a book in cloister always poor, or swinken with his hands, and labour as Austin bid? How shall the world be served? Let Austin have his swink to him reserved. Therefore he was a prickosore aright. Greyhounds he had as swift as fowl of flight. Of pricking and of hunting for the hare was all his lust, for no cost would he spare. I saw his sleeves are filled at the hand with gris, and that the finest of the land. And for to fasten his hood under his chin, he had of gold wrought a curious pin. A love knot in the greater end there was. His head was bald, and shone as any glass, and eke his face, as it had been anoint. He was a lord full fat and in good point, his eyen steep and rolling in his head, that steamed as a furnace of a lead. His boots supple, his horse in great estate. Now certainly he was a fair prelate. He was not pale as a four-pined ghost, a fat swan loved he best of any roast. His palfrey was as brown as a berry. A friar there was, a wanton and a merry, a limitour, a full solemn man. In all the orders four is none that can so much of dalliance and fair language. He had y made full many a marriage of younge women at his owen cost. Unto his order he was a noble post. Full well beloved, and familiar was he with franklins over all in his country, and eke with worthy women of the town. For he had power of confession, as said himself more than a curate, for of his order he was licentiate. Full sweetly heard he confession, and pleasant was his absolution. He was an easy man to give penance, there as he wist to have a good pittance. For unto a poor order for to give is sign that a man is well y-shrive. For if he gave, he durst make avaunt, he wist that the man was repentant. For many a man so hard is of his heart, he may not weep although him sore smart. Therefore instead of weeping and prayeres, men must give silver to the poor freres. His tippet was aye farced full of knives and pins for to give to fair wives, and certainly he had a merry note. Well could he sing and playen on a rote. Of yettings he bare utterly the prize. His neck was white as is the fleur de lis. Thereto he strong was as a champion. He knew well the taverns in every town, and every hostler and gay tapster better than a lazer or a beggara. For unto such a worthy man as he accordeth not, as by his faculty, to have with such lazers acquaintance. It is not honest, it may not advance, as for to deal with no such poor ale, but all with rich sellers of vitail. And over all there his profit should arise. Courteous he was, and lowly of service, and as no man nowhere so virtuous. He was the best beggar in all his house, and gave a certain frame for the grant. None of his brethren came into his haunt. For though a widow had but one shoe, so pleasant was his in principio, yet he would have a farthing ere he went. His purchase was well better than his rent. And rage he could and play as any whelp in love days. There could he muchel help. For there was he not like a cloisterer, with threadbare scope, as is a poor scholar, but he was like a master or a pope. Of double worsted was his semicope, that rounded him as a bell out of press. Somewhat he lisped for his wantonness, to make his English sweet upon his tongue, and in his harping, when that he had sung, his eyen twinkled in his head aright, as do the stars in a frosty night. This worthy limitour was called Huberd. A merchant was there with a forked beard, and motley, and high on his horse he sat. Upon his head a Flandrish beaver hat. His boots clasped fair and fetisly. His reasons aye spake he full solemnly, sounding alway the increase of his winning. He would the sea were kept for anything betwixt a Middleburg and Orwell. Well could he in exchange shields sell, this worthy man full well his wit beset. There wiste no wight that he was in debt, so stately was he of governance with his bargains and with his chevasance. Forsooth he was a worthy man withal, but sooth to say I not how men him call. A clerk there was of Oxenford also, that unto logic had a long ago. As lean was his horse as is a rake, and he was not right fat, I undertake, but looked hollow, and thereto soberly. Full threadbare was his overous courtpy, for he had not gotten him yet no benefice, nay was not worldly, to have an office. For him was lever have at his bed's head 20 books, clothed in black or red, of Aristotle and his philosophy, than robes rich, or fiddle, or psaltery. But all be that he was a philosopher, yet hadde he but little gold in coffer. But all that he might of his friends hent, on books and on learning, he it spent, and busily gan for the souls pray of them that gave him wherewith to schole. Of study took he most care and heed. Not one word spake he more than was need, and that was said in form and reverence, and short and quick, and full of high sentence. Sounding in moral virtue was his speech, and gladly would he learn, and gladly teach. A sergeant of the law, wary and wise, that often had he been at the parvis, there was also full rich of excellence. Discreet he was, and of great reverence. He seemed such, his words were so wise, justice he was full often in assize, by patent and by plain commission. For his science and for his high renown, of fees and robes had he many won. So great a purchaser was nowhere none. All was fee simple to him. In effect his purchasing might not be in suspect. Nowhere so busy a man as he there was, and yet he seemed busier than he was. In terms had he case and doom as all that from the time of King Will were fall. Thereto he could indite, and make a thing there coulde no wight pinch at his writing. In every statute could he plain by rote. He rode but homely in a medley coat, Girt with a cent of silk, with barres small. Of his array tell I no longer talle.